Welcome to episode 68 of the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Dan Strafford. Today we're kicking off our newest mini-series entitled The Skill of Data Literacy. In this series, we're going to explore the importance of developing the key future-facing skill of data literacy within individuals and teams. Of course, to do that, we'll be talking to Andrew Temte himself, the man, the myth, the legend. How are you doing, Andy?
Doing fine. It's an interesting time right now as we're recording this. It's just before Thanksgiving 2022. My wife has COVID and I don't. So fortunately, we live in a larger home. So I'm living down in the basement on the other end of the house and wearing my N95 everywhere, hoping that we can then get to Thanksgiving and have a good day. So fingers crossed.
Yes,
and,
fingers crossed.
And I'm not spewing COVID out to all of you. It just doesn't work that way. So you can keep listening.
That'd be a whole other level of transmission if it was through podcasts. There's plenty of things transmitted through podcasts. COVID is not one of them. I will say this will be a challenging podcast for me. Andy and I, of course, used to work together what seems like ages ago, but I used to do a update at our former employer, Kaplan, called Good Day Kaplan, and data was used often, data science and data literacy. And I would switch between data and data. And it would often beguile and upset Kathleen Acton, who is a good friend of mine, to the point where she'd make fun of me for it. So I'm going to stick to data. I'm going to stick to data the entire time here. I'm going to do my best. But we're going to dive into this topic. And I think you keyed in the future-facing skill, right? This is just something that we know, we've heard about, and that needs to be discussed in the business world. To get started, in your book, Balancing Act, you talk about 4 key future-facing skills. Can you remind us where we are on that list?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about data literacy. Ha, ha, ha. We've had a mini-series on financial acumen, also business acumen. We talk a lot on the podcast about human skill of varying varieties. But so those are the 4 key future-facing skills in the book: financial acumen, business acumen, human skill, and now that of data literacy. And I'd just like to as we close out this series, note that we're being very purposeful with our words here. We're talking about acumen. We're talking about literacy. We're not talking about mastery and expertise. Though that's a different thing. What we're trying to do here is to get more people in an organization to understand the basics of these key skills.
Yeah, the word literacy often carries a lot of weight, but it's understanding it. It's being able to understand it and be able to be conversant in it, not necessarily be somebody who is 100% the leader in this field for your organization. Why don't we dive into how you would define this phrase for the layperson and who needs to build over time data literacy?
Well, the answer is everybody needs to build a data literacy. And I'll just read from my first book, a base level understanding of data, how it works, where it comes from, what it can and can't do, how to visualize it, how to incorporate it into products and services, and how to harness its power effectively. That is the skill of data literacy from my perspective.
I guess what may be the most important question of this podcast is why? What's the why behind the importance of this skill?
Right. Well, I'll break this down into 2 primary focal points. The first is that in your business, to have an environment where trust is balanced against accountability, measurement and transparency is paramount to having an organizational culture that is built upon accountability and fosters trust. So what I mean by measurement and transparency is knowing what our key performance indicators are, and collecting the data within our teams and sharing the outcomes of what our team is producing, how our team is doing with other parts of the business, so that everybody can feel comfortable and confident that they're getting the kinds of outputs from our part of the business that they need along the value chain or the value stream in the business. So that's number one. Measurement and transparency is absolutely essential. The second is that there's a lot of risk with data, and especially its misuse. So if you've got somebody in the organization who doesn't understand data privacy laws and goes rogue and collects data and uses it for, and usually unintentionally, for some business purpose that ultimately gets the entire business in trouble, that is a big challenge. And so at a bare minimum, there is a compliance related function that needs to be addressed as it relates to data. And everybody in the business needs to understand the compliance side as well as how we can use data to maximize trust and accountability in the organization.
From what you're saying here and what we've talked about previously, you've really indicated that many companies just don't take full advantage of the data they're generating. What do you see as one of the biggest blockers to really unlocking the value of a business's data?
Yeah, so there are a number of key blockers, and I'm really interested in what our guests are going to say here to what these blockers are. From my perspective, there are three key blockers. The first is ownership. And the fact, and we'll talk about this later in the pod, but the fact that individuals and teams in the business feel like they own the data that they collect that's in their department, and they don't want to share that data across the business. So there's this ego and ownership aspect that is a key blocker. The second, and this is probably the most important, which is incoherent tech stacks. Yes, it is late 2022. Yes, technology has awesome power, but most businesses, almost all businesses, deal with legacy technology stacks where this system doesn't talk to that system, and getting the data out of here and put into there in a coherent form is just, it's an exercise in futility many times. So those incoherent tech stacks are a key blocker. And then the last point that I'll make about blockers is that there tends to be a lack of connectivity between goals, the goals of the business, the goals of the team, and the key performance indicators, meaning what we are measuring on a day-to-day basis. And what we need to do as leaders is ensure that the corporate story that we're all telling is aligned with our goals, and that what we're measuring, what we're collecting data on, aligns with that story. Many times our KPIs are not congruent with the corporate story or the goals that we're driving against. So clarity, coherent tech stacks, ego, those are the three big blockers, in my opinion.
You were just touching on, and we also talked before the show a bit, the ownership of data within an organization, the risks, benefits of centralization versus democratization of data management in a business. Can you elaborate a little bit further on this and where that problem lies?
Yeah, Absolutely. And this is an essential bit that, and I'm talking mainly about the compliance part of the equation that I referred to before. The chief financial officer many times is in charge of the company's data. Now, that might seem a little odd, but there are arcane accounting rules and laws that force a separation of duties. And in many organizations, the chief financial officer takes responsibility for the company's data. Now, that then spawns a tug of war between the technology department or the data and analytics function, which could sit in any one of those two functions, or it could sit within the chief operating officer's role as well. So you've got CFO, COO, and Chief Technology Officer, or CTO, all competing for this quote unquote ownership under the banner of regulatory risk, but also, knowledge and information is power. So which of those three players has the most power in the organization? And you get into this tug of war, and the folks that pay for it are ultimately the business's customers, because we're not unlocking the full value of data, and we're forcing people to contort themselves to prove why they need a certain piece of data and why that report is important, and we just get into these big fights of centralization versus democratization, and that's a real balancing act that companies need to figure out.
After this quick break, we'll dive into what business leaders can do to improve data literacy across their organization.
Thanks for listening to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andrew Temte. In my book, Balancing Act, Teach, Coach, Mentor, Inspire, I explore the characteristics required of leaders who must find balance between strength and vulnerability, confidence and selflessness, passion and measure, and leadership and followership. Balancing Act is available today at Amazon.com.
And we are back. We teased it. We're here. We need the answer. What can business leaders do, Andy, to help improve data literacy across their organization?
Well, in my opinion, the answer is make it experiential. And what I mean by that is be very purposeful about linking the goals of the organization with the key performance indicators, what we're measuring, and what data we are collecting. Utilize the concept of a Gemba board and Gemba walks. Now, the word Gemba might be, it's definitely foreign. It's a Japanese term, at least foreign for us here in the United States. It's not foreign if you're listening to this in Japan, obviously.
And welcome.
Yeah, but the concept of a Gemba board is to increase that measurement and transparency within a department. A Gemba board is either a physical or virtual board. It can be digital as well, where the goals of the department are right there. What we're measuring is right on the board. What our outcomes are, who we serve are right on the board. So Gemba boards are an awesome way to get the entire team together and working in harmony to A, understand where the data comes from, and B, continually use it to storytell. So then that leads to another experiential tool, which is use town halls and communication events as education tools. At a town hall, pick a piece of data, pick a goal or a KPI and highlight it and show specifically to the whole organization, where does the data come from for that particular KPI? And lastly, make it real. Focus on the customer. Way back in one of the first questions you asked me today, we talked about risk of misuse and measurement and transparency as the why behind the importance of this skill. But the why is really the customer. It's always the customer. So you start making data collection and the use and unlocking data for corporate, for corporate competitive advantage. That's what makes data real for folks.
So we've talked about the business side of it. I'm going to venture a guess here and say that this educational process should not begin at work. It should begin sometime before that. Where does this key skill start getting developed? Where should this learning begin?
Yeah, well, in today's world, it begins in primary school and at the latest in middle school here in the United States, which is our grades 6 through 8. And this is data and digital literacy combined. Those two things go hand in hand. And here I'm talking about basic coding skills, basic, data management skills should be taught in our primary and middle schools and carry through into secondary schools. I believe strongly that everybody in our economy should know at least the basics of how to code and also understand the basics of where data comes from, how it's housed, what it's used for, what the risks of misuse are. That should all be taught very, very early because otherwise you're going to have a small subset of haves, which are the data scientists and the data professionals that will have a lock on all of our data, and everybody else will be at the mercy of those teams, constantly having to go to them for permission and to get the data and to figure out how to use it. So the more we can democratize both digital and data in our young populations, then we should go forward in that light. Now, Dan, we're going to keep this episode a little short today because we've got a whole host of guests joining us on this topic.
Yes, sir.
I recorded the episode that follows this with a gentleman named Raghu Krishnaya from the University of Phoenix, and he's got some wonderful insights. But from your perspective, what have we left on the table today? What should we have talked about that we missed?
Well, I think you hit on so much. I think the responsibility, the ownership of data is such a hot topic, like you said. Who owns it at the top level? But even drilling down further and saying every employee owns it too. Every employee should have that understanding, but also the sense of ownership that they can use the data that's available to help their job and help do what they're doing. It is so often the data is on high, the decision making's on high, everything's trickled down from the C-suite, and eventually it gets down to the middle managers and those doing the I always refer to as worker bees, those doing the day in day out tasks to keep the trains running on time. But I think the more people have the literacy and the understanding of the underlying data, the more they should take the ownership to then utilize it properly and to put it into play. I will say quickly here, my new role, my new job is at a company that largely is trying to break down these silos and make data not only available to everyone, but make it real-time data in product development and in manufacturing. And so it is that technology, right, to really democratize and get it in front of everyone that is scary at times to people. And is how do we use it? How do we use it properly? Are we citing the right data? Are we tracking the right data? And for me, KPIs always scared me as an employee. It was always, I'm a video and audio producer by trade. So are we doing views? Is that my KPI? How many people watch this? Okay, what's my baseline? Well, make it up. Okay, all right, great. So, but I think that's to the point, right? You need to do the research. You need to find what data you have available. Okay, now let me benchmark against other competitors or other coworkers, whatever it may be, and really own that data and own the KPI and have the support of your manager and your manager's manager in doing that.
Yeah. That's wonderful, Dan. And I'd just like to stress for everybody that I'm not saying that the data scientists and the data and analytics teams that are absolutely essential in businesses need to somehow give up their authority. Nope. Businesses are going to need data, folks that can build really solid data models, and most importantly, build those models so that people with a lower level of understanding of how to use data can unlock its secrets within the business. And that requires a wonderful working relationship between the experts and those that have a high degree of literacy to be able to bring that data to life. Too often, I see the experts putting up artificial guardrails to the use of data and that ownership. I own this data and you've got to prove to me beyond a shadow of a doubt why you need this data. I mean, those fights are just so corrosive to organizational culture. We talk about trust and accountability. And, those fights, it's late 2022 when we are recording this. And, the experts should believe and rely on their expertise. Right. It's always going to be needed and necessary. At the same time, be a teacher and coach and mentor others on the effective use of data. That's probably the last thing that I would say to wrap things up.
I may have seen that on a book jacket at some point. Mentor, coach. just pointing that out. Of course, you can find The Balancing Act where you find your favorite books. The podcast is available across all the major podcasting platforms. Subscribe, rate, share, of course. Leave a comment on there. Find Andy on LinkedIn. Always happy to hear from people listening or even mentioning future guests or someone you might think would be a great guest for future. Also, slow process of putting these episodes up on YouTube, getting them out. So you can find that by searching Andrew Temte over on YouTube or The Balancing Act with Andrew Temte. All of that to rate, subscribe, like, share on all of the various social media platforms that are out there. Until next time. You've been listening to The Balancing Act.